Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. We are at the last show of this 6-part special by the Review of Religions, where we've been speaking about race and equality and race relations in relation to the recent events in the United States of America. Mulana Azhar, one of the first constitutions that most people aren't aware of, that predates the Magna Carta by over a millennia, is the Charter of Medina, which was a charter that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, established in a society where there were not just Muslims. In fact, there were people of different religions and a people of no faith, or people who believed in idols or polytheists. Yet many non-Muslim academics have praised the way that the Holy Prophet dispensed justice fairly. What lessons can we take from that today in 2020 in the United States of America and in other places where we are discussing these issues?
In the Charter of Medina, the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not of the majority group. The Muslims were still in a minority. And yet, owing to the ideals of Islam, the principles of Islam, all the other groups, non-Muslim groups, the Jewish groups, the pagans, everyone in that society, they agreed that he is best qualified to lead us and create harmony in this society, create unity amongst all the disparate groups who before that, with tribal warfares were going on and internal clashes and the desire to rise above and become the chief and all this stuff was destroying the peace and the order in society. So the beauty of the Charter of Medina was all groups agreed to recognize fundamental right of everyone to exist and support the concept of the common good. In all Arabia, there was no such thing. It was tribal law, tribal rule. It was the first time you had a type of a democratic system, not democratic in terms of the voting, but where everyone is considered to have equality and justice under the law. And it wasn't the law of faith, the law of Islam, it was the law of civil order that you agreed to. So now the non-Muslim is not going to be judged by the law of Islam, but by the law of the land or by the law of their particular groups. It was a very, you can say, a comprehensive way of looking at justice to dispense it in a way that doesn't deprive anyone their rights, but upholds the law and order. In that sense, of course, everyone, whether you were a Muslim or not, you had to observe that code of conduct once you agreed to it. So it wasn't forced upon them. It was acknowledged, accepted, and acted upon by every citizen, that they're to protect each other's borders, to not engage with outsiders to come in and create any kind of incursions and disruptions, to respect each other, and the dignity of basic liberties which was denied in Mecca. The fundamental right of life, the fundamental right of property, the fundamental right of having your own conscience and faith, right? The fundamental right of protection against outside threat. All these things you see are in that charter. And that's why it's acknowledged as one of the great constitutions written in the annals of human history, well before you talk about the Magna Carta and other such constitutions, and established true peace in Medina as a result, and a model for us going forward.
So final words, Dr. Basir, you have hope for the future, or do you fear that as I was mentioning, many elderly African Americans, some were optimistic, some were pessimistic, that we've seen such situations before and we just revert back to type? Are you hopeful?
I'm absolutely hopeful. I have a great deal of hope because it is clear to me that the desire of God, if you will, is to see society progress, and that human beings become more aware and more just, and ultimately human beings become more God conscious. So that is a living prophecy, right? Prophet ﷺ told us that. He said, as the years go by, people will fall away from old doctrines that don't serve them, and they will begin to seek the face of Allah. And your work is to convey the message so that when they're ready, their hearts and minds will be ready to turn. So that is an overarching vision for us. So the progress of human beings, I think, in general, is always going to be possible. With the issue of the what's happening with African Americans in the United States, absolutely, we're definitely going to be living in a different world, and I think we all understand that. Number one, COVID-19 has woken us up to all kinds of possibilities. Just this conversation that we're having so naturally, sitting in 4 different cities. 3 of which are in the United States and 1 across the pond. I think that's shifting how we perceive each other, how we learn from each other, how we grow with each other. And people are looking for more models, especially among African Americans and Black people. And that's a good thing, right? Recognizing that we're not only role models in music and the arts and sports, but we can be role models in other areas too, including spirituality and academia and scholarship and research and those things. So I'm very hopeful that my children will have a better world experience. They will have more friends and family from different cultural groups. I mean, when I think of just us as Ahmadis, right, we have a completely different experience than the world in which we grew up. And so I think Allah will open those possibilities for us, both as groups of communities as well as a universal human family.
Dr. Hassan, first of all, I hope and pray you can return back to Ghana, because I know right now the situation may or may not allow you, but hopefully you'll find a way. But yeah, how do you see it? You know, you're as I said, you have the best of both worlds to say. You've lived in these 2 countries. You know, are you seeing, like Dr. Rodney, hope, or do you feel that, you know, unfortunately, the way the world works, we had the coronavirus and that was the center of the world's attention. It's still big in people's mind, but then this situation arose as a result of this killing of George Floyd. And then this took over the media cycle. And this became, you know, the way the media works now, social media works now, one story then captures the attention of everyone. And unfortunately, tomorrow, another story will come. And of course, this will remain an important story, but many people will then move on to the next one. So how can we ensure in this, you know, people in today have very short attention span, that we keep this topic alive and we deal with it in the correct way? It doesn't get forgotten once again, unfortunately.
Yes, I would echo Dr. Basir Rodney. I'm also very hopeful that things will change. In fact, things have changed. And I believe we'll go full circle when we see that many of the injustices that we are talking about will no longer be there. You know, I will not make any prediction, but I am confident that God willing, this will change. And part of it is that America is changing. Soon, the majority population will not be white. And I believe the resistance for many white people is that right in front of their eyes, their majority status is depleted. But the younger people who've taken the mantle, many of them, you know, have traveled around. They do, you know, study abroad. They have friends who are not necessarily white, and so on. They seem to be a bit more open-minded, and I think it's important to be hopeful that this group of young people will not repeat the same mistakes that their fathers and grandfathers and so on made, and some of them continue to make. But it's also an opportunity for those of us who are members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community to use this occasion to inform our friends, folks in our communities about the true teachings of Islam. What we see is that a lot of people just turn off when they hear Islam, because the Islam they have made to understand and know is the Islam of violence, Islam where people's heads are being cut off and so on and so forth. And now we have an opportunity as members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community to let people know that the true teachings of Islam is the one that is talking about all these values, universal values, that is talking about peace, that is talking about justice. And I think if we do that, with the prayers of a Khalifa who has tirelessly been traveling around the world, preaching these values, will make some headway. So I am also very hopeful that things will change, inshallah.
Mulana Azhar, the final words, Dr. Hassan was mentioning about the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. So we spoke briefly about Philadelphia, and I had the honor of being there when His Holiness traveled there as well. And as Dr. Basir alluded to, it is it's called a city of brotherly love, but as many residents told me there, in some places, they're looking for this love. I mean, I'm just talking about Philadelphia as one example. You can take many examples throughout the country. But in this particular area, there are many issues. And again, we've discussed this before, that this is, of course, not the case in every African American community. There's different communities in different places, just like there are different communities of any ethnic group, and we can't just stereotype it into one particular city. But here in Philadelphia, where His Holiness came to, there are many issues. And a local brother there, Brother A.J. Rafiq, you might be familiar with, who's been a long-time resident. I spent a week there before His Holiness arrived, and traveling all over to the inner suburbs, to the places of where the Nation of Islam were based, and to the other residents, and spent time in barber shops, and they discussed with me many of the issues that they are facing. And some of them are facing very difficult, in some areas, very difficult situations. They're finding it difficult to get by every day and one of the biggest issues that they did a survey there in Philadelphia was people felt was public safety, was even just safety, just going out in the streets and feeling safe for their well-being. So when His Holiness went there, as a summary of what he said, he mentioned that, we are here to help you and aid you and assist you in whatever way that you need. And in times of grief and despair, he said, we are here to wipe away the tears of our neighbors and to support them and comfort them. So as a final thought, in terms of what His Holiness said, Mulana Azhar, I'm just referring to Philadelphia, but anywhere, how can people help and assist in the right way? And as the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, how can we play this role in the proper way in America?
It's interesting that what Hazur also mentioned in terms of history, these are cycles of nations. The rise and fall of nations have been before everyone's eyes when they study history. The African nations at one point had risen very high in the comity of nations, and then they had their decline. While they were at a position of height, so to speak, the Arabs were considered backward, primitive almost, wild and unruly. They had no law, no moral or ethical codes other than the might and is right, and the power of the wealthy and the tribal factions, etc. But what is what reminded us during that time, when the Muslims were being persecuted, the Arabs, and were not able to sustain, receive their just rights, even basic rights. They were pushed in the valley for 3 years, couldn't even get food and water and shelter. There, the Prophet of Islam directed them to go to which country, which group, which faith of people. It was the African king who was Christian in Abyssinia, Ethiopia. And he told, go to this king, for he will secure your rights and allow you to live in that land in peace with the justice you deserve. And this is exactly what they did. So you can imagine now we're talking about Africa, African peoples, being in the sight of the world nations, low down and not the place you want to go and you travel there and kind of seek refuge in these nations. Otherwise, it's the other way around. They're running out of out of African nations, seeking education and employment and other opportunities in other nations, including perhaps some in the Middle East. But the bottom line here is that it was at that time in early Islam when Muslims sought refuge in Africa. And Africa, prior to that, were amazing civilizations. This is what the world, again, forgets. This was not a land of primitives running around in jungles who had no order, no no development, no civilization. They had this was the cradle of civilization. They had developed the height of nations and had everything under the sun going for them, but they also declined like everyone declines with time. So my hope, what I see in this, in fact, is the despising of the African people, the black color, the link with certain cultural, lingual, or other patterns of life. This is also going to again shift. And if you look carefully, you see it shifting before our eyes. Africa and black culture is not despised like it used to be when I was very young. Despised to the extent where even the black people had self-loathing. They hated black culture. They hated being identified with Africa. They hated having their features a certain way, their hair a certain way, their clothing a certain way, to remove that identity. That was all pushed upon them. But now you see this group, you're talking about the new culture, the new generation, they love the black culture. They love the black identity and expression, whether not just the music, but the food, the clothing, everything about it. They are now, unlike when I was young, able to marry across generation, and it's not a marriage where it's forced. They're loving to marry interrelations between blacks. It was illegal in America. All that has shifted and showing the future is bright because Africa is also rising again and has all the potentials and all the earmarks. It's going to be in the future one of the great superpowers. They say Nigeria right now. I know my Ghanaian brothers here, he may not like me to prop up his neighbor too much, but Nigeria right now has the capacity to be the next China. The one you don't expect to suddenly rise in the next 10, 20 years as a great power in the world. So this is really what we're talking about is America and the Western nations really need to understand, if for no other reason, this group should not be suppressed and persecuted or denied rights any longer. The future is not in their hands. The sheer numbers, as brother Dr. Wahab Adam was saying, is no longer in your favor. America is browning and becoming blacker, not just in terms of color, but in terms of identity. It's a whole shifting of the demographics of the world. And thus, ultimately, what I see is a new order in the world, the global structure where, black is back.
Can I ask this question? Ask with great sensitivity again, and it's a difficult one to ask in the sense that, as you mentioned, these are cycles. We sometimes forget history. That, as you mentioned, the time the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, it was the people of color or the black leader who was giving refuge to the others. They had to come to them for refuge, and if Allah so wills, He can bring back such a situation at any time, any will. These are cycles. I'm wondering of a modern example of South Africa, where they had a situation of apartheid. It was apartheid against the people of color for a long period of time, and obviously great leaders like Nelson Mandela had a vision of unity, and he's no longer with us. And after this period, and Dr. Hassan may want to come into that as well, but after this period of so much oppression, when power was now obtained, has that been reversed now? And was that that what you were referring to earlier, how we must bring unity and not just bring the balance back to the wrong direction? I mean, do you have any comments on that, Maulana Azhar?
Yeah, again, this is why I say I have great hope. Is not just so much of the national reality, it's the global realities. Where Khalifa Masih the Fourth, Rahmatullah, once mentioned to the dear father of Dr. Wahab Sahib, a former Emir of Ghana, Abdul Wahab Adam Sahib, who was talking about the same scenario. That why is it, Huzur, everywhere you see in the world where there are African people, they are despised, they are denied rights, they are, in such almost the miserable conditions where they are. And yet we believe in a God who is just. a God who is proclaimed that he is for all and gracious to all, whether even the disbeliever gets something. But why do we always see such a glaring sense of injustice, imbalance for Black people? And Hazur then reminded him in that, and he reminded me that this also is not the end of the story. You know, a time is going to come because this is where it begins. So it's like a cycle. Where you begin, you end. And he said that the world began with the African civilization, and this is where it's going to end, just as in the case of the Kaaba. The Kaaba began in unity, and then for a while it broke apart. It was buried in the sand, forgotten about. But now you see it's become the center of uniting all of humanity spiritually. So Africa will rise again. But then he gave the same point you're making. He said at that time, however, they must also rise morally and spiritually, so that they don't commit the same atrocities against those who were committing the atrocities against them. Then the world would be just, and Africa's time to be in a sense of a superpower will be long, you know, and the world would have the benefit of such a people who don't seek revenge and don't fall back into those old ways of tribal warfare and other things as you're talking about South Africa. So to me, again, the hope is not just Africa rising, but Africa rising under the moral and spiritual teachings that will give her the beauty to truly rise. And we, of course, we believe that is the message of Ahmadiyya and on the Caliphate. This is how they will rise, inshallah. But again, perhaps Dr. Wahab will want to mention further.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Hassan, I think you've also been editor of Africa Today Journal. So, I mean, how would you see this?
There are two aspects to this, right? There is the Islamic aspect that Imam Azhar Hanif has so eloquently, elaborated on. Then you have the politics of it. I'll briefly mention the politics of it and connect it again to what we are talking about here. That the rise of Africa has to be based on the whole idea of justice. And in a lot of places, Africans themselves, under African leadership, have not seen this type of justice that we are talking about. If you look at South Africa, they've made a lot of progress, but there are also a lot of problems. Discrimination continues. A lot of people have lost their property. It's almost like they are trying to take revenge. And as Imam Azhar Hanif says, if you get the opportunity to govern again, and you decide that your model is going to be based on vengeance as opposed to absolute justice, which Islam teaches, then perhaps you won't succeed. You just throw away the opportunity to govern again.
So any final words, Dr. Basir?
Oh, no, I think this is an excellent conversation. Thank you for holding it and allowing us to participate. I think it's a very fulfilling conversation. Jazakallah.
Yeah, thank you. I also was greatly enlightened. I learned a lot. Dr. Hassan, any final comments very quickly?
Yeah, Jazakallah, this has been very informative. I've enjoyed being on the panel with the great Imam Azhar Hanif and Dr. Basir Rodney. I hope Review of Religions will continue, inshallah.
Thank you. And of course, Dr. Hassan, you're the editor of the Race and Equality section of Review of Religions. Your section has started commissioning and writing some articles on this topic, and people can go visit the website, reviewofreligions.org, and check out some more content coming up. And Maulana Azhar, any final words?
As they say, if there's injustice anywhere, there's a threat of injustice spreading everywhere. So we are grateful for this conversation. It needs to extend far and wide and keep on going. We must keep this topic alive and don't let a movement be affected by this marching protest, which is going to die down. This movement toward justice, absolute justice, as Azhar said, must continue until it's established in the entire world. God help us all.
And of course, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has, as always, responded practically to these events. I received a report from Amjad Mahmood Khan, who's the Secretary of External Affairs of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, United States of America. And briefly, he informed me that initially the Ahmadiyya community in the United States issued a press release under the guidance of His Holiness, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya community. And in that, they spoke about systemic racism. They condemned this savage attack. And they spoke about focusing on supreme justice and how we can achieve this in society and the obligations of the United States government. The community in the United States of America then undertook a letter writing campaign, and they advised Ahmadis individually to write to mayors across the United States. And as of recently, approximately 7,000 letters had been written by individual Ahmadis in the USA to different mayors, and they received many responses from mayors. Some of these mayors asked them to come for follow-up one-to-one meetings. Some Ahmadis in the United States received phone calls from these mayors, and they responded to this very positively. This then in turn created a number of conversations across the 60 chapters of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA. This was a prominent topic, and it took center stage for the community members in this sense. Similarly, there were several programs held by different of the bodies of the Ahmadiyya community in the USA. So the Ahmadiyya community USA also held and are continuing to hold a number of events to speak about this important issue. The PAMA, the Pan-African Ahmadiyya Muslim Association USA Ladies Division, also held a special event with a number of guests over several hours. Similarly, the Ahmadiyya Community USA held an event which is actually ongoing, an online talk show called #Supreme Justice, and they had Dr. Joy DeGroy, who was an author of a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. They had Honorable Karen Bass, who was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and they also had several other guests. Then the Lajna Imaila USA, which is the ladies auxiliary of the Ahmadiyya Community USA, they held a very high-profile online talk show as well. And in that talk show, they had 3 members from the Congressional Black Caucus of the United States of America. They spoke about issues of race, and the president of the auxiliary ladies organization of the Ahmadiyya Community USA, who herself is an African American, she moderated and hosted this event. There are also a number of other events that are taking place in different ways. So for example, the Ahmadiyya Community's official TV station, Muslim TV Ahmadiyya, they have recorded a number of programs on this issue which will be airing. And perhaps by the time this show is released, the Review of Religions one, it would have aired already. The Review of Religions also publish a number of articles and are continuing to do that, and we've made this 6-part special program. And for those who are not familiar, the Review of Religions is actually the official English language magazine of the Ahmadiyya community. In the United Kingdom, the Pan-African Ahmadiyya Muslim Association UK, PAMA UK, also held a high-profile event to speak about these issues of race, because I mentioned before, this issue is now gone beyond the borders of the US and is being spoken about globally. So here they held an event. The national president of the Ahmadiyya Community United Kingdom also took part, as well as the president of PAMA UK. They also had people from the police department. They had people from different academic backgrounds and scholars who also attended. So the Ahmadiyya community has been responding in different ways and will continue to respond to this important event, and we always do so in light of the guidance we receive from His Holiness, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya community, who has spoken, as we have mentioned many times. He has repeatedly spoken about this issue directly on race and how we should achieve it, and he continues to guide us on this matter and explains to us the correct ways to respond in a balanced way. So we've come to the end of the 6-part special by the Review of Religions. We hope you've enjoyed it. It's certainly been an enlightening experience for me, and for all of us who attended this show. We've gained knowledge from it, and we hope we've been able to present to you some of the issues and the balanced response that Islam proposes, and which His Holiness, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya community, has espoused on a number of occasions. So make sure, as always, you comment below, do join the discussion, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Peace be upon you all.